Welcome to the BBB National Programs podcast, The Bistro, where we will discuss today's hottest consumer trends, predict the future with consumer experts, and learn how elite businesses and entrepreneurs continue to push the envelope to meet and shape the consumer's needs in the marketplace.
Hello and welcome to the Bistro podcast. I'm your host, Elena Espinola. In the rapidly changing world of technology, the need to ensure our safety, privacy, and online security is something the FTC takes very seriously. In fact, the FTC typically reviews its rules every 10 years to ensure their effectiveness. One of those rules is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, also known as Coppa, which went into effect in 2000. Joining us today is Dona Fraser, Director with the Children's Advertising Review Unit, a program within BBB National Programs. Dona has joined us on the Bistro before and is back to share some insight on potential changes to the Coppa rule. Dona, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Elaine.
We love having you in the studio, and can you share with our listeners what brought you back in town?
So I came in town to speak at yesterday's FTC Coppa Rule Review Workshop, which was an all-day event, had a lot of players in the space, from consumer advocates to company representatives to Coppa Safe Harbors like KRUs.
So Dona, speaking of players in that room having this discussion, I know you have been at the forefront of digital privacy for children for a while. How long have you been working in this space?
So I've been in the Coppa Safe Harbor space for almost 14 years. The law has been in place for 20 years. In fact, it was legislated and mandated into law while I was in law school. So I learned about it from day one.
Got it. So can you, for our listeners, kind of just take us back to April of 2000 when this was launched and just share a little bit more about Coppa and why we needed this law?
So originally it was intended to, as the law says, protect children in an online environment. And essentially it was about protecting them from pedophiles in an online space. But it was also the opportunity to provide parents the ability to determine what their kids were doing in an online space, to determine how their kids' data was going to be collected and shared, but ultimately to provide parents with the options and the ability to determine what their kids were doing in an online environment.
Sure. Well, I'm a parent myself, and that's very important. And so much has changed in the digital space for children. We're going to get to that in a minute. But just recently, the FTC and the New York Attorney General sued Google, which owns YouTube, for violating Coppa. Can you just tell us a little bit more about this case for anyone who doesn't know?
So YouTube, as many people know, is a platform that has probably millions and millions of videos, many of which are very appealing to children. And they also have a property called YouTube Kids, which is a mobile app. It's not a website. And the YouTube Kids platform is intended to be filled with content intended for young children, those under 13 primarily. However, the way that the platform works is that if you upload a video to YouTube, an algorithm determines whether or not it belongs on YouTube proper or YouTube Kids, but it remains on YouTube proper if it gets sent to YouTube Kids. So a child can view it on either platform. So what was happening was that parents who shared devices with their young children would hand their tablet or their mobile device over to their kids after the parent having logged in to YouTube as using their Facebook, using their Gmail. So the device now believes that the user of that device is an adult, or at least someone over 13. And then they hand it to their kid. The kid watched Peppa Pig on YouTube. But they're getting served up ads that are not appropriate for those children, right?
Sure. And
the argument was that, okay, YouTube has tons of kid viewers. You have a platform called YouTube Kids. The presumption is that you've got kids' eyes. They made the argument for many, many years that they did not have kids on their platform, that they weren't collecting data. As it turns out, they were. So this violation, this case with the FTC, the settlement, was really about the fact that they were in violation of Coppa because they did have children, they had content directed to children, and they were collecting children's data improperly under Coppa.
Got it. And the example you mentioned is really real world, meaning
Exactly.
There's one way to say, okay, children under 13 go here, everyone else go here. However, real world, parent logs on, hands it to their kid.
Exactly.
And there you go.
Exactly.
Okay. Do you think, kind of based on that situation, that other online platforms and smart toy companies that advertise to children will proactively update their policies to ensure now that they are more in compliance with Coppa and avoid violations? And then, what's the potential impact if they don't? I mean, how realistic is this?
So I think that this was the FTC signaled an alarm to the industry as a whole, right? That if you want to get kids' eyes on your platform, that's fine. The law provides you with guidance on how to do that the right way. So if you are in this space, then pay attention to what was outlined in the consent agreement with Google. Big and small companies alike have to pay attention. They've got to do the right thing. I think this FTC commission is going to go after a lot of companies if they don't do this. And I think KRU is in a perfect position to help companies comply with this law, right? That's what we do. We help companies comply with Coppa, either through our safe harbor or through our investigations. But either way, we can help companies determine, look, is your product kid directed? If it is, you've got to do A, B, and C. And we can help you get there. But I do think that companies are going to have to take a step back, reassess what they're doing, look at their privacy policy, look at their terms of use and their terms of service, and be honest with themselves about who your intended audience is and who your potential audience is. Because as I said at the workshop yesterday, optics matter. So even if your marketing team says, we don't want kids, this is not the intended audience, who you attract, you have no control over.
Got it. And that's important because kids are now being attracted, especially,
Right. So if you take when the law was written 20 years ago, what attracted kids 20 years ago is not what attracts them today. And that's, I think, a reason for the update right now is because we've got to take into consideration how kids are evolving.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So much has changed in this landscape of digital technology in the last 20 years.
Exactly.
Can you walk us through some of the major advances as it relates to children and their online consumption of online stuff and other tech products?
Right. So again, when the law was mandated 20 years ago, kids were still sitting in front of televisions watching TV. Most kids do not absorb content in front of televisions. It's all on their iPads. It's all on mobile devices. They are watching YouTube like we used to watch TV as children, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So they're looking at everything. And they're influenced by what their friends are also watching, right? And you've got a lot of young people with YouTube channels who are engaging these young kids, right? And they may be 15 or 16, and it's okay under Coppa for them to have a channel. But young children always want to age up, right?
Yes.
They always are what they find appealing to a 9-year-old is someone who's 13 or 14, because that's exactly what they want to be, right? They want to be the older kid. So that's who they're looking at. So how kids are engaging, how they're using Fitbit watches and things like that. Alexa. How these kids are engaging in all of this technology in a way that surpasses what their parents are able to do. These are digital natives. They come out of the womb swiping left and right.
Yes.
They know immediately what to do. And it can be overwhelming, I think, for parents to teach their kids. But what we're trying to do at KRU is to help parents learn how to make their kids good digital citizens, right? Parents are very good at creating and developing children who are really good in the real world about what to do, right, wrong. You have to maintain that same environment in an online world, right? Teaching your kid to behave the same way they would offline as they do online, because it matters. And that stays with you a long time, right?
Yeah.
And parents need to be careful about creating a presence for their children at a young age in an online environment, because that stays there as well. But the way that kids are engaging, I think yesterday at the workshop, someone gave an example of a 9-year-old being hired by a footwear company to be an influencer.
Oh my God, my son would love that, by the way. Yeah, not a good idea, but yeah, keep going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you have young children who are being hired by companies to be influencers. So what does that mean for that child? What does that mean for the product? What does it mean for the audience of that product? Who are they intending, right? Because the footwear company will probably tell you, well, our audience is the parent. But you're using a child to send the message to the parent. And likely it's other children who are seeing that.
Absolutely.
So you've just got to be really careful. Companies need to be very careful in this space.
Yeah. As you mentioned, and we want to talk a little bit more about that, but kids are way savvier than ever before. They're way connected in so many different ways with friends, with influencers. And as you mentioned.
And in schools also. So let's talk about schools for a second. Because schools are mandating that kids have tablets.
My 3 just got them this year, and I kind of don't know how I feel about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? So you may have rules at home about what your kid can and can't do. You may have screen time rules. But then they come home from school and say, I have to do my homework on this tablet, on this Google Chrome computer, whatever it is. So being able to reconcile with, parents have to have the ability to reconcile with what their kids can do in school versus what they can do at home. And I don't think there's a lot of conversations happening between parents and the schools about what the rules are.
Donna,
and
because it's
time rules.
awkward.
Exactly.
Because I feel like, you want to feel, are you supposed to feel grateful you received this expensive piece of technology
Right.
and that's where they're doing their homework? And at the same time, I don't really prefer that personally in our household. And, you come in to kiss your kid goodnight and my middle school is going, well, I'm still doing homework. And he's sitting there on his laptop, which I would never have allowed in any other circumstance. And I'm that mom. I grab the screen, I look at it, and I go, "Are you sure? Show me?" And I don't want to have to do that, but it's their homework. It's given by the school.
Right.
My other question: how does Coppa come into effect there, as far as the data that the interaction between your child and this school-approved laptop? I mean, how is Coppa?
There are two laws that schools need to recognize. One is FERPA, which is the Family Equal Rights Protection Act, right? So you as a parent under FERPA have the ability to ask a school, and they will ask you in the beginning of the school year, they'll probably ask you to sign a form, whether online or a paper form, about certain permissions that you're going to grant the school to use. With regards to Coppa, sometimes the school will step in and act as you, right, to give permissions. Maybe a teacher wants to download an app in class. And so when we talk to app developers, they want to make sure that their app is Coppa compliant, because you do need to contain the data collection if you're in a school, right? So if the class is collecting data about the users, it's got to be contained in that environment and not shared. So the school has to be very much a part of the conversation. And every district and every city and every state, they deploy FERPA very differently. There is no right or wrong way to do it. There aren't any clear standards on how to do it, but Coppa is what it is.
Got it. Okay, let's also talk about this meeting that you attended. As I mentioned, we know that the FTC reviews its rules every 10 years to evaluate and ensure their effectiveness. You just attended this Coppa rule review workshop. Can you share some of the highlights that came from this meeting?
So I think it was a very interesting day. We talked about everything from the history of Coppa. My panel was about the scope of Coppa. We talked about persistent identifiers. And we had people, again, from all different areas that touch Coppa, right? So the consumer advocates who really take the position that, for the most part, zero data collection from children, zero advertising directed to children, data minimization, things like that. And then you have companies who are just like, look, we don't want to collect any more data than we have to either, but we just need to know the right way to do this. And my argument is that companies do want to do the right thing. They don't always know what it is, right? And that's where KRU comes in to help companies figure that out. But the conversations yesterday, I think, were intended to help the FTC figure out what changes they need to make to the upcoming rule changes, right? So they have a review period that ends October 23rd. And I think you're going to see probably hundreds of comments flow in from, again, consumer advocates, companies, individuals, consumers, companies like KRU and Safe Harbors, things like that, who are going to ask them to make certain changes. And I think one of the main changes you're going to see is the expansion of personal identifiable information. So when we had the rule review in 2013, persistent identifiers like IP addresses and cookies were added to the definition. Photos of children, audio from children were added. And you would think that that would already have been in, but it was not.
Right.
I think what you're going to see is biometrics, fingerprints, irises, photo ID, those sorts of things I think will definitely be added to personally identifiable information. Beyond that, I don't know what else they're going to add. We as a safe harbor are advocating for stringent rules with regards to safe harbors, meaning greater oversight. There has been a lot of criticism about safe harbors, which I take personally to some extent. But I do think that companies who join a safe harbor want to do the right thing.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
The problem is that you have 7 safe harbors in the country. We probably represent less than 10% of industry. So you have at least 90% of industry out there who are not part of safe harbors, who are either doing Coppa compliance on their own internally, working with an outside counsel, or don't know about it or don't care about it.
Got it.
And we've asked the FTC, you've got to do a better job of educating the ecosystem about what Coppa is, why it matters, why it's important, why companies need to comply, so that the more companies that join safe harbors, the less investigations the FTC has to do.
Sure. And the more compliant, hopefully, people will be. Because if they don't know, now they'll know.
Right.
If they don't care, we're forcing them to care and listen, right?
So you want a compliant ecosystem.
Sure.
Right? And that means not just the content provider, It means the advertiser. It means everyone who's touching that kid data, everyone who's putting something in front of kids' eyes. You want that whole ecosystem to comply with Coppa. The only way to get that ball rolling is for the FTC to be really strong in its messaging. And fines are not just the only way to do that. You can fine Google $170 million. But what does that mean for the small app developer? What does that mean for the medium-sized company who's going to roll the dice and say, look, what are the chances of us getting, swept up in an investigation with the FTC?
Right.
Not likely. I wouldn't take that position.
Right.
You've got to be careful.
Moving forward.
Exactly. Everyone is going to get touched by this.
Sure. And of course, KRO is a great resource for any company to get educated on the best way to go about this.
Absolutely.
Donna, as we wrap up this really great conversation, based on the work that you've done with KRO and in the future of the Coppa Rule FTC workshop you just attended, what are your thoughts on the future of online privacy and security? I'm wondering, are we on the precipice here of a new frontier in online regulation?
So there's been a lot of talk about a federal privacy law that would either incorporate Coppa or expand on Coppa. There's legislation about expanding Coppa, the law itself, because what this rule review does is not touch the actual law. It just touches the rule that helps you apply the law.
Okay.
So if you want to make actual changes to the law, that's a legislative action. So whether or not we're going to see that in this administration, I don't think so, but it's possible down the line. But again, there are federal omnibus privacy laws. We don't have that in this country. Other countries, especially in Europe, they have a federal omnibus privacy that touches every area, right? We are very patchwork here. We have privacy laws for banking, for healthcare, for things like that, but we don't have a federal bill that wraps us all in. That's being talked about and has been talked about for many years. Whether or not that happens, I don't know. But I do think that what you're seeing is more on a state level. So you have California, who has their Ccpa Act, which goes into effect in January. And that actually has an impact and in some ways conflicts with Coppa. So companies now have some challenges because they've raised the age from 13 to 16 in some areas.
Okay.
So a lot of states are starting to do what California did.
Okay.
So the state level, I think, is where companies need to pay attention.
Okay.
But because they're not waiting for Congress to do something.
Sure. Donna, you're a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Can you share your website with our listeners?
Sure. So our website is bbbnp.org, and you could look for the Children's Advertising Review Unit on the homepage.
Okay. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Elaine Espinola, host of the Bistro podcast. We thank you for listening, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Bistro on iTunes. Go ahead and rate us, give us a review, and please share our episodes to help inform and inspire others. Until next time, it has been my pleasure discussing better business and children's online privacy and protection with you.
You just enjoyed the Bistro podcast. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To learn more about our other shows, visit betterbusiness.blueberry.com. That's betterbusiness.blueberry.com. Follow us on Twitter at BBB_NTL programs. Send your comments and ideas to podcast@bbbnp.org. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB national programs or its affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Blueberry's Terms of Service.